Okay, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody is doing well on this Saturday morning. Can I ask everybody to type yes on the YouTube chat if you can hear me? So before we do anything, just let's make sure that everything is working. So can you just type yes, please, if you can hear me? Just gonna wait a few seconds because there's always a delay between me speaking and YouTube showing me speaking. Okay, there you go. Lots of yeses. Brilliant. Okay, so good morning. My name is Flavia. I am the Chief Scientist at Seneca Learning, who is organizing this conference. And today we have a series of really great speakers talking to you about behavior. I'm going to introduce them in a minute. But before I start, let me just give you a few overview about general rules and guidelines about how these events are going to go. So as you can see, we are live on YouTube. So the best way for you to communicate with us is to go on the YouTube chat. So you can type as many questions as you want. You can type as many comments as you want. The more, the better, actually. So if you want to interact with your other attendees, with your fellow attendees, you can. If you want to ask our speakers questions, you can. Actually, you should, because the more questions, the better. We love a good Q&A. So make sure you ask all your questions. If they say something that relates to your experience, you can type and say, I do this in my classroom, or we do like that in my school. So let's pretend that we are in a real room where we can talk to each other and use the chat to communicate with each other and with us. While I'm speaking, so as a preparation, please type in the chat your name, your subject, and where you're speaking from or where you're watching from, so we get to know each other a little bit. Okay, so that's the first thing. Make sure you ask questions and comments on the chat so we can have this as interactive as possible. That's the best conference that we can have. Second thing is that I'm a little, well, actually pretty sick today. So I will be trying to talk the little as possible, but I can still organize everything. But it's actually good because I'm going to hear more from the speakers than from me today. So just so you know, if I need to stop the screening for 1 minute to sneeze, that's because I'm sick, but hopefully I can manage until the speakers are talking. Okay, so we see people from Spain, from Bulgaria, from London, from Scotland, from other places in the UK, West Midlands, Blackburn, Norfolk, awesome. Okay, and then please take this whole conference to Twitter. So we use the hashtag SenecaCPG. I'm gonna type there on the chat. So there you go. Use the hashtag and tag our speakers. As they speak, I'm gonna put their handle on the screen and then make sure that you tag them and us as well at Seneca Learn, so that everybody can keep talking about the conference on Twitter later on. I think that's it. So before I let Elena start her presentation, I'm just gonna tell you a little bit about Seneca. In case some of you don't know about Seneca, I see some names that I recognize here on the chat, but there are some names that I don't, so you might not know what Seneca is. So just 1 minute overview about Seneca before we start and kick off the conference. So Seneca is an online platform. We have over 6 million people using Seneca around the world. It's mostly in the UK. That's where we started, but we have lots of people using Seneca around the world. We cover, for the UK specifically, we cover everything from primary to A level. And why we do it is to use cognitive science in a methodology. So we make sure that all the content, all the assignments, everything that we have on the website, on the platform, is based on retrieval practice, spacing, interleaving, dual coding, all of those things that work really well to improve students' learning. And we also have the teacher features where you can select the assignment, set to your students, and receive a full detailed report in real time about their progress, which you can use for either summative or formative assessment as well. So we have most subjects, and I really recommend you go and have a look. We do have a premium package as well, but we have most of the things for free. So I highly recommend you having a look. I'm gonna put the website here on the screen as well. There you go. So I recommend you giving a try. See if we have your subject. We probably do. It's all exam board specific. So if you teach AQA or EdXL, we're gonna have one for each. try with your students, and then if you're interested in extra features like MIS integration or the reports that we offer for senior leadership teams. So we just launched a lot of features aimed at head teachers, heads of department, heads of year. And we have this MIS integration, which is really cool because it connects your school system to Seneca, so it makes everything much easier for everybody. So if you want to hear more about that, you can let me know. So just talk to me. I'm gonna put my email here as well. So if you're interested in hearing more about the senior leadership team features that we have on Seneca, send me an email and I'm happy to let you know more about them. But just go on the website and explore, and let me know what you think later on next week. All right, so I'm gonna stop talking and let Elena start now. So our first speaker is Elena Diaz, and I'm gonna let her introduce herself and go on with her talk. But make sure, again, type as many comments and questions on the chat as you can, because that's the best way that we can have a good conference. And I think, Elena, is that okay if they screenshot some of your slides, put them on Twitter?
Can you see?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Oh, sorry. So welcome everybody, and thank you for being here on a Saturday morning on what I think has been one of the busiest terms that I've ever experienced. But we're here for a very important reason, which is to talk about behaviour management, and to talk about behaviour management that's effective and it works for us, and that's inclusive for the children that we teach. You've got my Twitter handle on the screen. There's also a link to my blog, and there's a QR scan that will take you straight to my Twitter. I do tend to put a lot of my work on Twitter, so if you like what you see today, do follow me. There'll be more. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, we don't need to read that. This is my 19th year of teaching, started in 2003. I've worked in the Northeast in 3 different schools in the Northeast for that time, and I'm currently a head of department and research lead. I'm also a consultant, but I work, as I tell people who ask me if I work full time, I work very, very full time, and I do sort of walk the walk, talk the talk. My setting is a secondary school in rural Northumberland, and that's a beautiful photo. The school's not there. The school is in one of the most deprived areas of the country. It's got an IMD index of 2,921, and I'll explain to you what that means. So all the areas in the country have been ranked from 1 to 32,844. And the lower the number, the more deprived the area is. So I work in a school that is in a setting like that. Rural Northumberland can be really quite deprived in places. But I work in a school where behaviour is really, really good. And we've done some brilliant things about it. So what I'm sharing with you today is rooted in research, but more than anything, it's rooted on my practice and trial and error for many, many years. So I intended to be really, really practical, and hopefully there'll be some ideas that you can take and try out in your classrooms. I did call this presentation Effective and Inclusive Learning Behaviour Management, and I want to talk about why I think it's really important that behaviour is inclusive, because I think behaviour can really, the way that we manage behaviour can really exclude some of our students. So why do we need it to be inclusive? 3.7% of the student population have EHCPs. It doesn't seem like a lot, but the level of need that a student needs to have in order to get an EHCP is really, really, really high. 12.2% of the children that we teach, so more than 1 in 10, need SEN support. So a very big part of the student population. Most of those children will have ASD, if most of the ones that have an EHCP or communication, speech and language. So why does it need to be inclusive? Why do we need to be inclusive with our children? I think obviously it's part of our job. It's it's in our contract that we need to provide education for all the students that we teach. We know that, but there's something about teaching that is very strongly anchored in being good and being moral and doing the right thing. And SEND students are often more vulnerable in terms of learning. They are often more vulnerable, and very much not due to anything that they've done. It happens to some children. Nobody has chosen it, and I really think we have an obligation to make sure that we give them the same opportunities that we give other children. I did want us to spend just a little bit of time thinking about what's behind every EHCP, because we're very busy, secondary school teachers, and children sort of come and go, and sometimes we don't have the time to think about what's behind those letters. I talk from personal experience here, and getting an EHCP is a very, very, very long, very, very difficult process that's filled with emotions for the children, for the parents. That takes hours and hours of work from the staff that will help the parents get the EHCP, from the parents. Most EHCPs are rejected, and parents have to appeal and fight to get them. And many of them are never got. So by the time a student comes to you in primary or in secondary with an EHCP, this is a child with very, very high needs, and parents who have fought really, really hard for them. And I think it's really important that we try and see behind, just behind those letters. The EEF published an evidence review about SEND recently. And these are two quotes that I really like from their report. So very, very powerful quotes. So sometimes I think we struggle with the needs of some children, but it is these children that have the greatest need for excellent teaching. They need it. First, quality teaching. It needs to be there for them. They need it more than anybody else. We need to break down some barriers for them that other children don't have. And this other quote, which I think is very enlightening. So the difference in achievement for SEND students and their peers is twice as big as the gap between PP students and their peers. So it's a massive difference in achievement. And we might not be able to close that gap, but what can we do to make it smaller? I think behaviour plays a big part in this. I've also wanted to base this presentation on the EEF, on the SEN review, which I've got just here in front of you, so you can have a look. These are the 5 recommendations. But the one thing that I want us to take away from the SEN review from the EEF is this sentence that I put in the middle. So to a great extent, good teaching for pupils with SEND is good teaching for all. So anything that we put in place to support all students, but to support students who are more vulnerable and have more difficulties, will also help the other students. And that's really, really powerful. So we don't have to treat some students differently. We just need to make sure that what we do is really, really, really high quality for everybody. So I meant that should say why effective behaviour. Behaviour plays a big part in the quality of life of teachers as well. It's really important. I think if you ask teachers why sometimes they wonder if they're not happy in their profession, behaviour will come really, really highly. And there's some research that backs that. Teacher Tab often ask about behaviour. And this is, I saw this question, I thought I need to share this. So you can have a read yourself. So if you had to choose a school, if you have to choose between a school where, first of all, you have low workload culture, teachers leave without marking back, right, you can have a read yourself, I'll let you read it. So basically, we would prefer to work longer hours with good behaviour, the vast majority of us. That's it. That, I think that's true for so many people. Also, I had a look at the Teacher Wellbeing Index 2020, which is a document that's produced by Education Support. It's a charity that's there to support teachers. And this is a long document that has a lot of information based on the research that's been done on how teachers, teacher wellbeing, how teachers feel about in their job. And one of the graphs the bits of information that came with was a graph about what caused stress for teachers. And I think if I left this here for 10 seconds, you'd probably be able to list a few. In fact, I'm going to do that. I'm going to give you just 10 seconds to go in the comment box and type what causes stress for you. I can't see the comments, but I hope there's something coming up there. Okay, so I'll show you what the Teacher Wellbeing Index showed us. So this is what causes stress for teachers. So the highest percentage is with work-life balance, excessive workload, no surprises there. In 2020, which is the orange lines, COVID-19 has caused an awful lot of stress. But before then, the third factor that caused stress for teachers was behaviour. You can see the numbers are really, really clear.
Should I read some of the answers from the chat?
Yes, please.
So people saying things like too much admin, ineffective communication, challenge behavior that can take you a whole day to handle, lack of support, poor behavior is exhausting, having too many tasks, too much bureaucracy, long hours, paperwork, too many students in the same class, low budget, marking, but there are a lot of people saying lack of support in dealing with extreme difficult behaviors. So we do have a lot of people talking about behavior here, and also time and workload.
I certainly, workload, it's hard for me, but when it comes to stress, what really stresses me, about teaching really is the unpredictability of behavior. The fact that you can probably expect good behavior. I certainly expect it from my classes, but you can't guarantee it. And that causes a lot of stress for a lot of people. So I've had a think, and I've tried to organize my thoughts around the Improving Behavior in Schools guidance report from the EEF. You can tell I have a deep love for anything the EEF publishes, but everything that they publish is based on research, absolute tons of research. And so we know that whatever they suggest, whatever they recommend for us has worked. And so it's likely to work for us. These are the 5 main principles and the 6th one, which is consistency. So the EEF recommend the following. Number 1, know and understand your pupils and their influences. And I'll let you read this at leisure, when you get your PowerPoint, this PowerPoint. Number 2, teaching learning behaviors alongside managing behavior. So actually teaching students how to behave. Use classroom management strategies to support good classroom behavior. Number 4, use simple approaches as part of your regular routine. Number 5, use targeted approaches to meet the needs of individuals in your school. And number 6, consistency is key, which we know, don't we? So I've organized my thoughts around behavior around these principles. But actually, before I go there, I think there's a couple of things that I've learned about behavior that are really, really true for me. And it's that behavior is something that bad behavior is something that we need to prevent. It's not something that we need to react to. And the more we do to prevent it, the easier our lives will be. So I've been for a long time, when I was quite a bit younger as a teacher, I was a lead behavior teacher. It was a whole school role that revolved around changing the culture of the school and having behavior that was more positive and more effective, etc. And I am constantly scanning for what tweaks can I make to my practice or my environment to make sure that behavior is a little bit better every time. And so I would say from my behavior management is 90% prevention and 10% reaction. I don't want to, I've said this before, I don't want to deal with behavior. I want to just prevent it so it doesn't happen. So you will see that a lot of what I'm talking about today happens before the incidents happen. So if I start with number one, know and understand your pupils and their influences. Now, we have something called context sheets where I work. I've used them in other schools before, and I know lots of you will use them as well. But I thought I would mention them anyway because we'll have some new teachers here, and hopefully it'll be useful. So context sheets are just hopefully a side of A3, so not too much information, but enough. It'll be a class list for your class with the data, the useful data, the one that you use the most. It might be the latest assessments, with who has an SEN and what SEN this is, who's looked after, who's PP, perhaps reading ages, and then information about how they are working in your lesson. So often in my context sheet, I will have a group of students highlighted who show similar characteristics when it comes to either achievement or behavior. So I might have an intervention group, a group of children I need to watch very closely, a group of children whose behavior is not as good as the others. And I will have them sort of marked out. And on the side, I will every now and then go into this context sheet and write down things that work, things that have worked for me, successful sort of techniques, and things that I've tried with them as well, things maybe not to do. So this is a context sheet, is a live document that you keep next to you when you're planning, so that it informs your planning and that you keep adding to as ideas occur to you. So you have on one side of A3, A4, all the information that you need to have in your mind. I'm terrible for remembering things, so this is crucial. I need to know my customers. I need to know them really, really well. And especially at the beginning of a year, it's hard to remember. So having those handy is really important. I use annotated seating plans. So context sheets are not something that you can produce in the middle of a lesson, and you shouldn't. They've got sensitive information in them. So what I have is annotated seating plans that I can refer to in the middle of a lesson, and annotated with very short, maybe just one letter to tell me who has what need in that class. So they're separate from the context sheets, and they're things that I can produce in the middle of a lesson, perhaps when I'm questioning students and I want to target, make sure I target everybody and make sure that I target people appropriately, depending on the question that I'm about to ask. I have changed my mind many, many times in my career about seating plans. So I was told many years ago it should be boy, girl, that you should separate friends so they don't talk. I went through a stage where you would have different abilities sitting together so they could support each other. And all of those were valid. But what I'm doing now is I'm using supportive seating plans. So students will come in and I'll sit them down. If I have any previous knowledge of them, I'll sit them down depending on my knowledge of them. If I don't know them, I'll sit children who I think will need me the most close to my desk. And then I start a process of refining the seating plan. So the seating plan is supportive and children sit next to someone who's going to help them in their learning. And often this is a child's choice. So I will sit the children down on the first day and then I'll say, I'm very happy to hear what you have to say about the seating plan after the lesson. So please come and see me after the lesson. And if you want to sit somewhere else and you've got a good reason for it, please tell me and I'll do what I can to do that. Because especially I think in my language, we do lots of speaking in MFL. And we do lots of speaking in a foreign language, which can be quite intimidating. I want children to sit next to someone they feel safe with and they feel happy to sit with. Does this result in poorer behaviour? It hasn't so far. But if it does, then that seating plan is not working and it gets changed. I think tweaking the seating plan is a powerful tool, a very powerful tool for us. Just checking the time. And then obviously you need to know your students' SEND information. And this is, I could talk about this for a bit longer actually, but when I was younger, I would just have a look at student SEND information and look at the headline, autistic, okay? This, whatever label, all right, yeah, take it in, write it down. But one thing that I've learned in recent years is that there are no two children that are the same, definitely, we knew that. The autistic spectrum doesn't exist. It's not really a line that goes from left to right. The different needs of autistic people are ever so different that you just don't know. You don't know the child until you've read their information really from top to bottom. And I know that's hard work sometimes and that we don't have time, but the child that we've got in front of us deserve us spending that time and deserve, our effort, and to know that this information has been put together for them because it's important for them and for their quality of life. So some children come with reams and reams of information. It's important that we know about it and not just the headline. So we can adapt our teaching to them and we sort of remove those barriers. So the second recommendation from the EEF is teach learning behaviours along managing misbehaviour. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on this. So when we're talking about behavioural routines are really, really important, and we all have them. And I'm constantly changing mine, constantly changing mine, but I'm constantly looking at mine with a critical eye and asking myself, is this routine perfect? Does it need improving? Does it need tweaking? So I think most of my routines now are really quite honed and students know them well. They mean, if you have a good routine, it means that you don't have to give tons of instructions. Instructions can be heard or not heard. They can be overwhelming for some students. And having a strong routine means that you're not constantly directing, giving instructions, sort of stimulating the senses of children who are possibly already overstimulated. So we need to think really hard about our routines. We need to teach them. We need to allow for lots of practice because, we all need to practice our skills. We all need to practice the new things that we learn. And then we will see them work really, really efficiently for us. And I will talk about those in a second. We need to model good behaviour. So some children have not been exposed to the behaviours that we want them to display. So we need to model those behaviours for them. And we need, I think, when it comes to rules, as wrote expectations, but when it comes to behaviour rules, I think we need the fewer the better. And we need to talk about them all the time. We need to constantly reinforce them. So I'm just going to go through these in a bit more detail. I have routines for everything, and I've written a list there on the right-hand side of routines that I've had and that I know my colleagues have. I'll let you have a little read. I try not to change my routines unless there's something wrong with them. So for example, students line up and they come into the room, and I always do that in the same way. So they always line up on the same side, obviously. And as the student that's at the front of the line comes up to me, I smile and say good morning, whether I'm in a good mood or a bad mood, always smile and say good morning. Doesn't matter what they did last lesson. And I welcome them into the classroom while keeping an eye on the line and on the classroom. If a student is not ready to come in because maybe they're wearing a coat or maybe they're just a bit rowdy, I won't necessarily have a conversation with them about it. I will just look at the person behind them and smile at them and say good morning to them and give them my attention and my eye contact. This person will come in, and the one who is not quite ready to come in will very quickly get the message that that there's something that they haven't done. They will look around, fix it. 99% of the time, they will fix it very quickly and then come in. And I think this is just peer pressure. If they see everybody coming into the lesson, they want to come into the lesson. And so also the eye contact, the attention is something that students, without knowing, they crave. So I wouldn't tell students off. I would just go to the next one, smile, say good morning, and invite them in. Other routines that I have, let's have a look. I've just written them on the left-hand side. I have a good routine for when students come in. So the books are always sort of on the back desk as they come in. They're all sort of so the students can see their name, and they know that there's a task on the board. So students have been trained to come in, grab their book, turn to the back of the book, and complete the task that's on the board. And they do this automatically because they've been taught and they practice every lesson. And so there's no, I don't need to give them instructions. I don't need to talk to them. All I need to do is sort of watch that they're doing it. I would encourage them if they're forgotten, which they rarely do. I would encourage them by saying, praising the person next to them. Well done, Johnny, for turning to the back of your book. And it's very, very smooth, with very little interruption. I'll not go through all of these, but one thing that I do sometimes if I have, I'm just trying to think which one to. If I have a lot of information to test students, I will have this little routine where I'll have a PowerPoint that has question, answer, question, answer, question, answer on slides, and they are trained to look at the question, think about the answer, and when the answer comes up, award themselves a tick in the back of their books. These presentations always look the same. These question answer presentations, I call them ticks presentations. They always look the same. So when a student sees that presentation on the board, they have been trained to turn to the back of the book, find their previous ticks, and just in there, like mentally test themselves with this presentation. At the end of the presentation, they will count their ticks, write down the number, and check that the number was higher than the time before, which hopefully it is. So little routines that have been taught and that we practice almost daily, which means that we're not having to deliver lots of instructions to the children. I did say model good behaviour. So there are some things that students might find more difficult if they haven't been trained to do. Some students have been trained at home. Some students are naturally very good, but not all of them are. So I don't expect that students know, regardless of their age. I don't expect that students know. And so if they don't know how to do any of the things on this list, for example, I'm happy to train them how to do it. I train students specifically on how to coach each other. So on what to do if my partner doesn't know the answer. I've actually trained them to do that in Spanish as well, which is on the left-hand side, you've got a picture of a display. So I'll just translate a few bits for you there. Like, for example, there's a bit there that says good answer. So I train students to praise each other for good answers. There's a little bit there where they've got the language that you need to use for taking turns. I have language that you would use to tell students, like give students hints on how to get an answer right, but without giving them the right answer. So all of these behaviors are things that I'm happy to teach the students as many times as it needs for them to happen. I teach students how to mark their work by actually writing my own answers on the board and then marking them in front of them. And I always train them. I say, if there's a mistake, it needs to be corrected. Look, I've just written this word and this letter is wrong, so I'm just going to change it by crossing it out and then writing the correct letter at the top. And I don't mind doing that for them. I think it's actually quite necessary. Okay. There's also a few things on the list there that are a bit more to do with how I manage my emotions. Like, what do I do when I get a low score? What do I do when I put my hand up and I don't get picked? And I talk students through this. Just to help them get it right and preventing those feelings and what they can cause in terms of behaviour. I mentioned a few rules, expectations. I call them expectations in the lesson. I think it's a powerful word, and it's a respectful word as well. Rules seems a little sort of like imposed on them in a way, and expectations seems to make more sense. So I've given you an example of a list, a very short list of rules, and this is the ones that I would use. And I talk students through them, and I would say I've only got 3 rules, and they're purposefully just 3 words, so that students can remember them, and I can refer to them constantly. I sometimes despair when students are presented with a list of maybe 10 rules, because I know they're not going to be able to remember them. There's too many. Whereas these 3, they will remember: respect, effort, preparation. I'm not obviously suggesting that you should use these, but these are the ones that work for me. And I reckon that there are no behaviours that happen in the classroom that could not be linked to these. So I'll often teach these rules at the beginning of the year, and then I'll keep going back to them, and I'll ask students, sorry, what are our expectations? And sometimes I'll use them when bad behaviour happens, and I would say, remember, our expectations are respect, effort, and preparation, and this was not respectful, and so on. Just checking the time. Please let me know if I need to wrap it up, please. Number 3 is use classroom management strategies to support good classroom behaviour. So I just thought about a handful of the classroom strategies that I use at work. Okay, I'm removing barriers. So for example, I know that some students find it hard to grip a pen and write properly, and that their writing is difficult for them, and also it's not clear to read. So I do all the writing for them. As in, for example, students never copy in my lessons. If there's anything that needs to be copied, I will copy it and print it and give it to them. So the only thing that they need to write is their productive work, their essays, their answers, their translations, etc. So I will always look for any barriers for student success, and if I can, I will remove them. Thinking time is really, really important. So whenever I ask a question, I will always pause afterwards. And often I will add an extra layer. So it won't be question answer, it will be question thinking time answer, or it will be question thinking time tell your partner answer. So by the time students write an answer, tell me an answer, volunteer to produce an answer, they've had time to think about it, and they've had time to tell their partner and share. And it's that telling your partner that brings the risk all the way down, because when they're telling the partner, hopefully that's a safe space. The partner can confirm that they agree, or they can say, actually, it's not like that. And students have a bit more reassurance before they volunteer or write down or give me their answer that they're probably right and it's safe. Chunking is very important. So chunking is when basically you break anything down. So break a long task down, break a reading down into small chunks, break instructions down into long chunks, and we'll talk about that later. So many students, not just SEN students, but many students struggle to retain a lot of information or concentrate for long periods of time. Not through any fault of our own, that's just the way their brains are wired. So I would always make sure, and it works really well in languages, that long activities are chunked in stages. And that would really support students. I mentioned earlier that I greet all students always with a smile. I don't know how many smiles they've had by the time they come to me. So by the time they come to me, they're definitely going to have a smile. But I filter them. So I make sure that by the time they come in, they're in the right frame of mind. And I filter them, as I said earlier, by giving my good morning and my smile to the ones that are ready. Clear, positive instructions. I think when you're a new teacher, you need to practice your instructions, and so they need to be short. They need to be few, maybe just 2 or 3. They need to be given while the students are listening. So when they're making eye contact and their pens are down and they're quiet, they can't be given while the students are doing work. And when it comes to behaviour, I wrote positive instructions, and by that I mean tell students what to do, rather than what not to do. And this is an oldie but a goodie. So if a child's running in the corridor, you will say walk. You won't say don't run. If a child's chewing, you won't say why are you chewing. You will say chewing gum in the bin. If a child is poking their friend with a ruler, you will say put your ruler down, carry on with your work, rather than stop poking your friend with a ruler. And you are much more likely to get the action that you need if you do that. So that's what I mean by positive instructions. Face consequences. I would say you need to have, and I remember when I started teaching, I had to write these down. So have a list of consequences that you give to behaviors, and have it in your mind. So my number one would be just eye contact. Staring at a child can be really powerful. Number two would be say the child's name. That will often stop the behavior. Number three for me would be state the behavior that you hear. You, like, for example, Johnny, you're talking while I'm talking. Number four would be ask the student what the rule is. So if someone's on their phone and you've already, tried your other techniques and that hasn't worked, you might ask the student, sorry, what's the rule for phones in school? And that would probably do it. Number five, I think I'm up to number five, announce an actual consequence. That could be moving seats. It could be, if you continue with this behavior, I'm going to have to send you out, or I'm going to have to give you a consequence, etc. Number six, deliver the consequence that you've promised. Number seven might be send a student to a different classroom or remove them if this is not working. So have in your mind, have a list of things that you can do that are faced, as most of them as quietly delivered as possible. That means that you don't deal with all behaviors by having a conversation. Now, if you saw the first one was just eye contact, that's silent. It might be that one of your consequences is to move next to the student. That often works and it's silent. It might be that you very gently tap on the table. Again, that is powerful and it's quiet. It doesn't interrupt the learning. It might be that you just go like that and you give a signal, a physical signal. How am I doing for time?
Yeah, I think we should be wrapping up now, if you can, because we have a few questions to answer as well.
Okay, so I'll talk less now.
Just finish that one,
Yeah. So learning comes first, no discussion. If a student wants to discuss behavior during the lesson, you just offer coming back at the end of school or at the end of a lesson, and that will often finish the discussion. It's very important for students with SEN needs that they can predict what's going to happen in the lesson. So without making your lessons too formulaic or boring, I would say lessons need to have a familiar structure, and that helps students. Or if you have a student who is refusing to follow instructions, often presenting instructions as choices means that they're more likely to follow them. So if a student is unlikely to sit down, you might say that their choices are to sit down here or there. And if you present those as the choices, the student is more likely to sit down than if you just say, sit down here. One instruction at a time for behavior and for work will really help. So give an instruction, check that it's followed. Give another instruction, check that it's followed. Maybe two, but not many more. Find the friction. I always am constantly on the lookout for what's causing misbehavior, and that can be different with different classes. So one example of this is that I have a class where misbehavior starts when I ask them to answer the register in Spanish. And I think children should answer the register in Spanish, but that has been creating friction. So I've given them a break from answering the register in Spanish without saying anything for just a few lessons. And now the friction's gone and they're volunteering to answer the register in Spanish. So I found the friction, removed it, that eased the tension, and it's really helped. And then offer students opportunities for regular success. Students need to feel that little buzz that you get when you get things right. So you need to engineer this, and it needs to happen all the way from the beginning of the lesson. That doesn't mean your lesson is all easy. It just means that there are regular opportunities for students to feel that they've done well. I've got quite a few more to talk through, but I'm happy to just come back and do it some other time. Shall I stop sharing?
Yeah, you can. Yeah. Let me remove that. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you so much, Elena. That was really great, and I'm sure that would be continuing to be great. Just for the sake of time, we have to stop now. But thank you so much. That was really great. There were a lot of comments and people sharing their own experiences in the chat. So what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna paste some of the questions on the chat, put them on the screen, and then you can answer them. So here goes the first one. There are a couple questions about routines, when you were talking about routines as well.
Right. So I've had to do that quite a few times. So the thing that worked best when I moved rooms was to have a paper task. So I would arrive in the classroom with my box of stuff. I would give a student who was at the front of the line the paper task and say, can you give this out, please? The second student, can you give the books out, please? Those two go in first. They do the welcoming of the students for me while I go and log in. And hopefully by the time all the students are in and have finished their little paper task, their bell work, whatever you call it, and I'm ready for the lesson and they're ready to make a start. That's what's worked best for me.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, there were other people also suggesting on the chat that you can have a pre-prepared starter task as well, so you can already get started as soon as you get to the room. There was then another question, well, two, but I put them together, about routines here in terms of working in a large organization. So the first question was the one that you shared. Is it just you, or does everybody in the school does that? Is it better if everybody follows the same routine?
So ideally everybody would in a large school, but there's no denying that there are some routines that just belong to you and your classroom and how you organize it. So depending on the school, they will have a handful of routines that everybody has to share, won't they? I always have my own extra ones. I think I wouldn't start with all my routines at once. I would start with the first one, the coming into the classroom routine, make sure that I teach that, practice it, then start a new routine, the tidy up routine, for example, teach it, practice it, the going quiet routine, again, teach it, practice it. You can't teach them all on the same day. You can teach more than one on the same day, but you can't teach them all on the same day. You just add them one by one. You need to have like your own routines that help you, and children do learn them, and they learn that when they're in your room, it's your space, and you follow they follow your routine, but just like one at a time.
Yeah, fantastic. And then there were just some people here. I was typing because they were asking for you to record your own video because they want to hear more from you and share your own talk with everything. But I said they can contact you on Twitter if they want to know more.
I always want to help, and I know behavior puts people off the profession. I know behavior can make teachers very unhappy, and I really want to help. So if you're struggling with behavior and I can help you, I will. Just get in touch. Right, let me read that.
So from Nick, I think it was Nick, not a real name.
So I think, Nick, that we all teach students who, I can't diagnose, but I do teach students who I think need a diagnosis. I just treat them in the same way. So remove the barriers, clear instructions, know them really, really well, talk to them, ask them what they need, what they like. So just a combination of knowing them really well, trying to cater for their needs and remove barriers. So if a child's struggling to write, don't write it for them. Help them, help them communicate their knowledge in a way that might be briefer or easier. Just remove barriers, know them really well, and they will get their diagnosis. It takes years to get a diagnosis. It takes such a long time sometimes, not every time, but sometimes. So we just treat them as if they had it, I think.
Great. So last question before we move on to the next speaker is I cut my last word. It was all of them. But go. Sorry.
Oh. So I think this is I try so hard to do this. Okay, so if you're in a classroom and you'll often have a classroom with 2 or 3 children who are attention seekers, maybe one that has some extreme behavior, and then 20 odd who are beautiful, angelic, really well behaved, hardworking. And it really upsets me that you sometimes have to end up ignoring their behavior and just focusing on the behavior of the children who are difficult. And we do have to do that because we can't ignore bad behavior. We can't let go. If bad behavior is happening, unless we are ignoring it in a tactical way because it's best for us, we have to deal with it in the same way every time, as in make sure that students don't think that I'm going to let it go. So I make a conscious effort, and it is not always easy, to make eye contact with students who are behaving, say their name as often as I can, and not necessarily just constantly praise them, but at the end of a lesson, recognize that they've worked really hard, and just to let them hear it. But things like knowing their names and eye contact are very, very powerful because they are praise in themselves. And often those children who are just in the middle there, people don't notice that they're there because they're quiet. So I think it's really important that we try and do that. But I recognize it's an effort. Like, it's an extra effort sometimes if you've got a difficult class and you're already dealing with, sometimes you feel like you're just juggling 10 different things, aren't you? You're teaching and trying to, as quietly as possible, manage the behavior of a few children. But I think that's one of those things that I really want to conquer. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. It really is difficult sometimes, but I think there are strategies that we can use to try to make it easier for us. So thank you so much, Elena. I think it's time to move on to Janet now, but thank you so much. That was really, really interesting, really great. And there were still more questions and more comments that we don't have time to cover. But like I said, feel free to contact Elena on Twitter, and she'll be more than happy to keep talking to you about behavior. Great. So thank you so much. Stay tuned. So next up is Janet. So Dr. Janet Rose is here. Let me remove Elena. Okay, so that's a new speaker, the next speaker. I'm gonna let her introduce herself and go on with the talk. And same thing, make sure you type all of your comments, all your interactions, and all your questions in the chat. I'm gonna ask them to Janet in the end. Okay? Thank you, Janet. Welcome.
Thanks, Vivian. Hi, everybody. Great to see you. Can I just check you can see me? Yes?
Yes.
All good?
All good.
Okay,
All
and
good.
you can see the PowerPoint, more to the point. Okay, well, hi, everybody. Great to not see you all, but to see all your comments and all your hellos in the chat. And great to see so many people from all over the world. I'm here in England in a little place called Bath, which is about an hour from London. And my background, just very briefly, is I'm a primary school trained teacher, but I then went on to work with young people at risk. And I now work at a higher education college called Norland, which is actually an early years specialist course where we train and teach early years professionals. So I've kind of covered the whole age range. And the thing that I'm going to talk to you about is emotion coaching. So we've had a wonderful talk there from Elena with some brilliant preventative strategies, as well as some sort of in the moment strategies that we can use to support children's behavior. And she's also talked about the importance of special needs and children with additional needs and so on. I have also done a lot of work with children who have SEN and so on. Also, children who've experienced trauma. I've done a lot of work and research around children who are looked after. I noticed someone in the chat mentioned trauma. So, so this strategy is an evidence-based strategy that has been used across the world. Actually, it originated from America, and here in England, we've been researching using it in professional settings, and that's right across the age range. So it's a universal approach that can be used with all children, but it can also be used for those children with those additional needs, including children who have ADHD, on the spectrum, and so on and so forth. I'll try and talk a little bit more about that as we go along. I'll flag up the fact that on here are a whole range of free resources on this website, Emotion Coaching UK. And I'll kind of make links as we go along to other resources and so forth. These slides will be made available to you, so don't worry too much about that. So really what I'm going to flag up today is, and my talk follows on nicely from Elena's, I think, because she's talked about these broad principles and strategies that we need to have in our classrooms, whether it's early years or with older young people. And I'm going to be talking in particular, so these were, sorry, the strategies were, as Elena mentioned, were largely preventative. I'm going to talk about a particular strategy called emotion coaching, which is for those reactive moments. So emotion coaching is for the in the moment. What do I do right now, right here with this child that's kicking off? And what I'm going to emphasize is that emotion coaching is very much what we call a relational approach. And I know some of you have mentioned in the chat about the importance of relationships as well. And it also is an approach that echoes a lot of what Elena was talking about, those principles in the EEF. That have highlighted, for example, what helps to bring about effective behavior and so on. Emotion coaching is it's an approach that can be used in a consistent way. It involves teaching effective behavior. It involves role modeling, something Elena also emphasized. It involves teaching expectations. So it kind of has a nice package. And I'm going to try and very briefly introduce you to it, but I'm going to contextualize it a little bit by giving a little bit of a talk on the importance of those relational strategies. And you as teachers and practitioners are going to have many tools in your toolkit, as Elena has described, to help support children's behavior. Now, some of those are going to be external frameworks and consequences, and we're not saying don't have those, by the way. I'm not for 1 minute suggesting don't have some sanctions or use rewards as a system. But what these systems do is that they tend to be external frameworks, and they tend to focus on managing and getting that behavior right. And that is a goal that we want to achieve. But what the relational approaches do is they tend to work more on developing internal frameworks. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the neurobiology and the neuroscience behind why emotion coaching helps to work with your body and your brain to help build those neural networks to help the child learn to regulate themselves. And it does focus a lot more on what's going on here rather than just what's wrong with you and so on, as some of the rewards and sanctions approaches can tend to do. So I'm going to start by just talking about emotions, because emotion coaching is all about emotions. And Elena has also flagged up how important it is to think about how children are feeling, if they're feeling anxious, and often how this often lies at the kind of root of many behaviors. They might be bored, they might be scared, they may be upset. They could be a whole range of things. And these emotions here, which is depicted here from a movie you might have heard about called Inside Out. I'm going to show a clip about that later. And these are what are called our primary emotions. And we are all born with these, no matter what culture, what background, what gender we are all born with these emotions. And these emotions become much more complex, become what we call secondary emotions. And there is a spectrum on each of these. So with anger, we can have boiling rage, or we can have mild irritation. With fear, we can have a little bit of anxiety to full-blown terror. And all these emotions kind of blend together to become what we call secondary emotions. And these can be adapted to culture, and they might become genderized. For example, big boys don't cry, those sorts of attitudes. And they become part of our moral framework and our value system, and so on. So, and the key message here in emotion coaching is that all these feelings are normal and natural. And an important message about our feelings is that they are here for our survival. They help us to survive, and they are an integral part of our what is called our stress response system and our social engagement system. And I'm going to very, very briefly just talk a little bit about these two key systems. One thing I want to mention before I move on is to just flag up to you that if we look at these primary emotions that we all seem to have, and there's a little bit of argument in the literature around this, about how many primary emotions we have, but these are the most commonly accepted ones. If we have a look at these, you'll see that most of them are what we might deem to be a negative bias. Sadness, fear, disgust, anger, they're what we might term negative emotions. And what we now know about our brain is that we have this negative bias because our brains are looking all the time for the bad stuff. And they're kind of joy here in the middle, trying to be happy, trying to be nice, trying to be good, trying to feel okay, which is what we want all our pupils to be, happy, learning pupils. Unfortunately, their brains are looking for bad stuff all the time, and so they're kind of outnumbered. This does, of course, help to explain why it is quite hard in many ways for us to be happy, because our brain is looking for bad stuff going on. Okay, so just moving on then. So what I'm going to just very briefly talk about is these two key systems. Now, these are very complex systems, and I'm very oversimplifying. But these are all based on research and theory that are coming out from neurobiology, neuroscientists, and so on, and work of people like Stephen Porges. And he talks about how we have this inbuilt social engagement system that is primed. Our brains are kind of social brains, and even from birth and probably even in the womb, our brains are seeking social engagement, ways of connecting with others. How we do that might start off as just screaming like little babies when we're born, but it's nonetheless an attempt to say, hey, who's out there? I'm not okay. And with time, we start a long journey then to develop much more socially appropriate behaviors, using smiling, using language, using morals, values, and appropriate behaviors to build those social relationships. And this lays the foundation for all our social cognition, including our morals and how we should behave, following school rules, and so on. But at the same time, part of this system is this stress response system. And this is our survival system, and our emotions are part of that system. And this lies at the heart of this system here, needs to work with the social engagement system to help regulate ourselves, to regulate our emotions, to regulate our stress, to behave appropriately. And this, of course, lays our foundation for our learning, our ready to learn. And I saw some of those comments in the chat about that being a core value, that idea of being ready. And in order to feel ready, we need to have a nice balanced state in our body and brain where we're feeling calm and engaged. We're not feeling angry or upset or irritable or bored. And if we are, we need to be able to regulate that to cope. So a really helpful way to explain and simplify this is to look at the work of Dan Siegel, and he's come up with what's known as the hand model of the brain. This is a very oversimplified metaphor for this idea of when we are having a stress response or behaving inappropriately, what we need to do to try and calm ourselves and sort of get into a better space and place and pay attention to what we need to learn. So his hand model of the brain, you can look it up on YouTube if you want to find out more. He basically talks about this representing our body, And then this bit here is representing a part of our brain that's responsible for breathing and eating and sleeping. And then there's another bit of our brain here that where particularly where our emotions seem to emanate. We've got a fight-flight type responses going on here. And this part of our brain is what he calls our downstairs brain. It's our survival brain. And it's on duty all the time. This is the brain that's looking for the bad stuff. Oh, I don't like this. I don't want to pay attention to that. I'm feeling really upset about something that happened last night in my family. And so it goes on. And this is the kind of brain that you might have with some of your pupils. They're worried about what's going on with their lives, for example, instead of using their upstairs brain, which is represented by the fingers, which is their thinking brain, their learning brain, their rational brain, their school rules brain. And so on. So this is our kind of more advanced brain. This is our frontal lobes, for example. This is where we have what's called executive functioning. And this part of the brain is the brain you want in charge. And that's the brain you want in your classroom all the time. Yes, those brains. Unfortunately, some of them are like this. Yes. And when I say flipped, you know, when I show the flipped brain, that doesn't mean that they're completely disconnected from their upstairs brain. And I'm sure anyone who's ever had a pupil swear at them will know that whilst they're behaving inappropriately, they're still accessing their language centers of the brain, which are upstairs to tell you how they're feeling, but obviously in a socially inappropriate way. And so what our job is, in essence, with behavior management, all we're trying to do, in effect, is put the lid back on. And that might be a lid that's a little bit flipped, that's a little bit distracted or a little bit disruptive or not quite paying attention to you. And we need to get that lid back on and back concentrating on us. And as Elena showed, there's lots of wonderful ways we can do that. But what about if they're a little bit more flipped than that? What about if they're upset or they're really exhibiting disruptive behavior? And this is also when you can use emotion coaching to help put that lid back on. And this ability to put that lid back on is ultimately what resilience is actually all about. And this is what we're trying to do all the time with behavior management, especially those children who have got those additional needs, those SEND children, the children who have experienced trauma. And you could argue that the whole world has experienced a global trauma with this pandemic, with the impact that it has had on all of our lives, and the way in which in particular it has cut us off from those social connections that we need to help calm and soothe us, remembering our brains, our social brains, seeking connection, and so on. And we might have experienced bereavement, we might have been prevented from learning in an effective way, and all sorts of things. So we've kind of all had downstairs brain, even if it's just been having to queue for your food. And in England at the moment, we're having to queue for our petrol as well, on top of everything else. And I bet many of us who've had to do all that queuing, if someone pushes into the queue when you've spent a long time, it's annoying, right? We all flip our lids all the time, even as teachers and as people in everyday life. And what do we have to do? We have to put the lid back on. And we try and perhaps use more socially appropriate, socially engaged ways of coping. And I'll talk a little bit about how emotion coaching helps us to put the lid back on and to work with the upstairs brain, with teaching those expectations and so on and so forth. So that's kind of just a little bit of background, very, very briefly, to just have a little think about those reactive behaviors, those in the moment behaviors that are inappropriate. And you're like, what do I do? How am I going to deal with this? And so on. And as I said, emotion coaching is an evidence-based strategy. We've been researching it in this country for about 10 years. And as I said, we've been researching it with all pupils of all ages, including the early years, including toddlers, and also with adults. It's been used very effectively with parents. And I know that when Elena showed that slide, she showed how dealing with difficult parents is also a source of big stress for teachers. And what our research has also shown is how it helps with teacher stress. Again, something that Elena was talking about. Lots of the research is showing that using something like emotion coaching can help regulate your own stress. because that's also important. So I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. But what I'm going to do now is just start to introduce you to emotion coaching briefly, but I'm going to also briefly summarize what I've just talked about through a clip. So I'm going to stop sharing, I think, and I hope I'm going to now be sharing. Oh, there we are. Hurrah.
Emotional regulation. Emotion coaching. Emotion coaching is an approach which focuses on the development of emotional regulation through supportive relationships. Children, young people, parents, and professionals can all benefit from using emotion coaching. All emotions are innate, meaning we all have them, but that doesn't mean we can manage our emotions easily. We learn to understand and regulate our emotions through our relationships with others. Sometimes we experience emotions in a very big way, making it more difficult for us to process how we are feeling. For example, Charlie is feeling really sad because she is not being listened to. We all feel sad, angry, or frustrated sometimes, but Charlie is still learning how to manage these big feelings. Dan Siegel suggests that the brain is like a house, with an upstairs and downstairs. The upstairs brain is more complex and is where we learn, process language, and develop problem-solving and decision-making skills. With experience, problem-solving skills are refined, but the upstairs brain isn't fully formed until our mid-20s. The downstairs brain is responsible for breathing and impulsive reactions to strong emotions, like the fight, flight, or freeze response. Sometimes, when Charlie experiences very big emotions, she stays in the downstairs brain. On these occasions, she might act on the impulses she has, without thinking through the consequences. Before Charlie can understand and process these emotions, she needs support from a trusted adult, such as a parent, carer, or teacher. Once Charlie feels safe and calm, she can then be supported to move to the upstairs brain. Emotion coaching supports Charlie to be able to move from the downstairs brain to the upstairs brain through a process of co-regulation. Co-regulation is when a trusted adult is able to make a connection with Charlie and support her to feel safe, and this can help her to learn to manage these big feelings. Emotion coaching strengthens relationships through increased understanding and empathy. It is essential that the adult connects with the child's emotions rather than judging the child's reasons for feeling this way. This is achieved by the adult connecting with the child before correcting the behaviour. Emotion coaching has 5 key steps. 1. Notice the child's behaviour and tune in to the emotion beneath. 2. Connect with the child and recognise emotional times as opportunities for intimacy and teaching. 3. Listen empathetically and validate the child's feelings. 4. Help the child to verbally label emotions. 5. Set limits on the child's behaviour whilst helping the child to problem solve. There are a number of potential benefits to using emotion coaching. These include supporting children to regulate their emotions, promoting positive relationships between adults and children, increasing academic attainment, and helping adults to feel empowered to manage children's behaviour. If you think you could benefit from emotion coaching, please visit www.
I'm going to switch over back to the PowerPoint now. We got that there? I assume that's there. Flavia, is that okay?
No, I think you have to share your screen again for the PowerPoint to pop up again.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Okay. There we go. There we go. Right. Okay. So I can see some questions coming in, and we are going to address those, and some really interesting, good points being raised there, which I'm going to try and address as we go along as well. So, so that's a kind of narrative description of what emotion coaching is, and you've just seen a little visual one as well. But this is the essence of it. It's about helping children understand their feelings, why they occur, what's happening, and most importantly, how to regulate them. And emotion coaching is, in essence, and I know something has been put in the chat about this, it's essentially a co-regulatory strategy where you work with the child, the young person, even the adult, to co-regulate them, which then helps to lay those foundations to help them to learn to better self-regulate. So it builds that foundation for self-regulation, and so on and so forth. And I will address the points that have been made about neurotypical and children with additional needs and so on, because this strategy has been used and adapted to different children with different needs, as I mentioned in the beginning. So I'll answer those questions at the end. So I'm going to come back to this clip later. The term emotion coaching was coined from this chap called John Gottman. And what's interesting about emotion coaching is it's not something that got created or invented, but it was observed. So there are many of us who are intuitive emotion coaches, especially if a child is feeling or a young person is feeling sad or anxious. But we're less intuitive sometimes when children are being angry, if they're misbehaving. Then it's less intuitive sometimes to emotion coach them. And the important message that John Gottman developed was that all feelings, all emotions, all desires are okay, but the behavior that manifests from that feeling might not be okay. So it might be, I'm feeling bored, but it's okay to feel bored, but what it's not okay is to start disrupting the lesson and distract other children because you're feeling bored, if you see what I'm saying. You might be feeling cross and fed up because the teacher's taken away your mobile phone, but it's not okay then to start swearing at the teacher and so on. So it's an important distinction with emotion coaching. Feelings are okay, desires are okay, behavior might not be. And so it's trying to help. What we do is we empathize and validate the feeling, but we don't empathize and validate the behavior and so on. So what we did with John Gottman's work is we started to translate this into 4 steps, in fact, in busy classrooms. And I will address the issue of time here, because some people say, I haven't got time to start a big therapy session, and so on and so forth. But emotion coaching can be done very quickly and very simply. And it doesn't have to be a long, complex process. I've seen it work within seconds. This part here is the most important part, probably, of emotion coaching. And it's the bit that most gets missed out in most behavior management techniques. Because we all jump to the limit setting, to the boundary setting, to the rules. We're good at this stuff. We're good at talking through or working with a child in an age-appropriate way. Obviously, the younger the child, that aspect would get scaffolded more. With a younger person, you might be looking to them to come up with ideas and ways forward of what to do next time they feel like this. But what you're most importantly trying to do is you're trying to connect the child or the young person with how they feel, so that they can start to see that it's their feelings that are likely to be manifesting in the behaviors. And you can start them on a journey of helping them to understand that when you feel like this, we need to do that. And I'm going to address these questions about neurotypical and so on by using the example of a child on the autistic spectrum. Especially children who are nonverbal, because some people have commented in the chat that a narrative-based strategy isn't necessarily very helpful for children who are nonverbal, for example, or are atypical. in their brain processing and so on. But it has been used successfully because you just adapt it accordingly. You can use nonverbal cues, for example, and so on and so forth. But in this particular child, he was an 8-year-old child on the spectrum, and what he would hit. So when he got upset and angry, or when he flipped his lid, it was a stress response. And that's why we need to understand that behavior is ultimately a stress response, not bad behavior, not naughty, not necessarily manipulation, not necessarily rude. The behavior might come across in that way, but it's a stress response, even when it's triggered by not wanting to do something that they don't want to do. And the brain goes into that kind of survival stress mode. So this boy on the spectrum, as you can imagine, he's got a lot of additional needs going on there. His brain is not necessarily operating in a sensory processing way that perhaps a neurotypical brain. And nonetheless, he would just hit children. So they needed to work with this child to try and help him to connect more with his feelings. They didn't necessarily do this always in the moment. Sometimes they waited until he was feeling calmer, and then they would try and talk with him. This child was verbal, and they were able to talk a little bit with him to try and talk about what was going on in his body when he hits. He's got a bit of a working memory, so he was able to recall an incident and so on. And what came out is that he was able to describe that he saw red. And so this became, if you like, the language and the shared understanding that the teacher had with this boy. And they were able to work with him a little bit to say, when you see red, this is what you can do. So again, keeping it simple, keeping it structured for him. And they had a calming corner or a regulation station in the classroom where he was able to use some sensory objects and so on to help calm him, to help put his lid back on. They were able to use the hand model of the brain with him to help him to understand what was happening and why he was hitting, and then to help him to start to develop more of a kind of an inner awareness, what's called neuroception, to help him to think, I'm feeling like this. I need now to go to my calming space and put my lid back on, and so on. And the teacher often would just say, I think you're seeing red. And then often that would be like a connection for him. This only took about 3 attempts of communicating with him, you're seeing red, for him to actually start to use his calming space. And the hitting stopped, in effect. It only took about 3 attempts. And so this was, but there are other children who perhaps are not on the spectrum, for example, where you can actually in the moment say, I think you're feeling angry and we need to go to a safe space now, or whatever, to help you put your lid back on. And you can teach children about the hand model. You can teach them about emotion coaching when they're feeling calm. And so that when you actually then use it in the moment, it's familiar to them, or at least they kind of understand a little bit of what's going on, and they're not shocked and surprised by you empathizing with them, which can happen, especially with children who have experienced trauma. So it's not complex. It can be hard though, and someone has commented that how co-regulation does take time and skill, and that is true. And we've got schools, for example, who have introduced emotion coaching into their school. And again, we talked a lot about whole school approaches today. Very important. The great thing about emotion is it can be a whole school approach. And what they did, for example, at the beginning of each staff meeting, they spent 10 minutes brainstorming incidences that had occurred in the school. Each teacher took a turn to do this, and they would brainstorm, right, Johnny was doing this, this is what happened, and then they would brainstorm emotion coaching scripts, if you like, things that they could say in that moment or do that would be helping to co-regulate that child, to help get the lid back on, and then what they can do to work on the problem solving. What can we do next time? Or next time that you feel like this, let's try that, and so on. And the thing is, the idea about setting limits, obviously with the younger children, you're still teaching them how to behave, you're still teaching them those rules. But most children and young people, they know the rules. They just can't keep them necessarily for whatever reason. So we're trying to work with them to help them to do that. So obviously it's not a quick fix. It's not a panacea. We're not trying to turn you into therapists. But what we're trying to do is to not let, to try and help practitioners who work with children and young people to not disapprove or dismiss and so on, but to try and empathize and validate, to help calm and soothe that downstairs brain so that you can then work with their upstairs brain more effectively and so on. Now, just to, I've got a little bit more time, I think, so I just want to, I'm going to show a clip in a moment. We're just going to have a little think about different styles that are used and so on. And one thing I want to say to make sure I get it in is that some people, when they look at something like emotion coaching, they get worried because they think it's some, you know, lovey-dovey, namby-pamby, you know, sort of approach. But it's not. It's a evidence-based approach that seems to work with our built-in body and brain mechanisms, our stress response system, our natural social engagement system, to help us to learn that self-regulation by having that co-regulation, that scaffolding, that support to build up your own neural infrastructure and so on. Even with children who aren't neurotypical, there's evidence to show that you can still use this strategy and adapt and adjust it to suit their needs and so on. And what this some people say that, you know, what about consequences, and, you know, it's going to let children get away with bad behavior and so on. But again, what all the research shows is all these children who are at risk of exclusion, who are creating incidences and so on, what the research shows is that it reduces it. There was one special school that just used rewards and sanctions. It had children in there with additional needs, children who had social, emotional, mental health difficulties, SEMH school. There was a lot of physical interventions that had to go on because there was a lot of physical fighting and so on. And they introduced emotion coaching. And these are two separate special schools in different parts of the country. They both reduced their physical interventions by 50%. So imagine how much less stress that's causing the teachers. We've got lots of data. In fact, I've put at the end of my presentation that I won't show you, data that has been validated by Oxford University about how it reduces incidences, reduces exclusions. So think how much time is being saved here. So what we found is that whilst it might take some time for some of these children to respond to emotion coaching and to start that process of self-regulation, you save time down the line. But as I said, I've seen it happen in seconds as well. So let's watch this clip now. Before we start playing it, Flavia, what I want to ask you to do is to have a look at this clip. So I'm just going to provide a context. It's from the movie Inside Out. And there's a character called Bing Bong featuring. And he is the imaginary friend. And we're inside the brain of this child, okay? And this funny creature you're going to see is Bing Bong. In fact, if you could just show the clip but not start it, Flavia, that would be great. Because what we just pause it. Thank you. So that funny creature you saw, he's upset in this clip. He's upset because he was the childhood imaginary friend, and he is upset because all the childhood games and memories are being chucked into the pit of forgotten memories. Okay, and there's two characters, emotion characters. There's joy and there's sadness there. Okay, they're lost in the brain. And they need to get back to central headquarters, to the frontal lobes, to the executive center. Only Bing Bong knows where to go, but they can't get there and they can't ask him because they're upset. And what I want you to do, if you can, is to have a look at the strategies that they use. Look at what joy does and look at what sadness does. If you have time and if you want to, put them in the chat. But basically, I want to see what look at the strategies they use to try and resolve the fact that Bing Bong, his brain is flipping and he's in distress. Okay? Thank you.
The stuffed animal Hall of Fame! My rocket! Wait! Riley and I were still using that rocket. It still has some song power left. Who's your friend who likes to play? No, you can't take my rocket to the dump! Riley and I are going to the moon! Riley can't be done with me.
Hey, it's gonna be okay. We can fix this. We just need to get back to headquarters. Which way to the train station?
I had a whole trip planned for us.
Hey, who's ticklish, huh? Here comes the tickle monster. Hey, Bing Bong, look at this. Oh, here's a fun game. You point to the train station and we all go there. Won't that be fun? Come on, let's go to the train station.
I'm sorry they took your rocket. They took something that you loved. It's gone. Forever.
Sadness. Don't make him feel worse.
Sorry.
It's all I had left of Riley.
I bet you and Riley had great adventures.
Oh, they were wonderful. Once we flew back in time. We had breakfast twice that day.
Sadness.
It sounds amazing. I bet Riley liked it.
Oh, she did. We were best friends.
Yeah, it's sad.
I'm okay now. Come on. The train station is this way.
How did you do that?
I don't know. He was sad, so I listened to what...
Hey! There's the
And
train!
there we go. Thank you. That's the end. Brilliant. So yeah, we can go back to the PowerPoint, and I've been looking in the chat, and yeah, you guys, you got it spot on. Lots of talk there about acknowledging feelings, not disregarding. This is sadness, empathy. Let's talk about it. Listening, not avoiding the subject. Fantastic, and so on. And joy, of course. Absolutely. See a comment there. Distraction, avoidance, trying to move on, trying to use humor, and so on and so forth. Look, by the way, I'm not saying don't ever use those other strategies, by the way. But if we're going to be using to try and work with the child to help them to learn to practice putting that lid back on, to calm and soothe them, to get that lid back on, to build those motorways in the brains that help them practice putting the lid back on, we need to do more of what sadness was doing. And you might say, I haven't got time, got 20 other children, and so on. But what I can tell you is that this strategy is evidence-based. And it has been used, as I said, in special schools. It's been used with children who've experienced trauma. It's been used with children who are neurotypical, but who just have had a bad day, are having a bad day. It's for every kind of context. You can even use it with your dog or your partner, but probably not your cats, because they only experience disgust. And I hope I haven't just alienated all the cat lovers in the audience today. And so on. So yes, we're not saying don't use distraction. That can be quite very useful for toddlers, for example, or in the classroom, especially if it's a low-level disruption. But there are those moments when they need that connection and that co-regulation. And sometimes you need other tools like that little boy I told you about to help calm and soothe them, to get that lid back on. But there's no point reasoning. There's no point using reason and logic and trying to tell a child what they should and shouldn't be doing if their brain is largely downstairs. What we need to do is get them into a place and a space where their upstairs brain is more kind of engaged with you, and then you can work on them with the problem solving and so on and so forth. So there's some lovely comments coming in, which I can see, which is fantastic. And I know we're going to have some questioning time, so I will come to that. I know there's some questions about the teenage brain and so on and so forth. So that's really just emotion coaching as a summary, because I need to start finishing off now. But I'll just finish with the last couple of comments, if I may. So I'm just going to go back to sharing my PowerPoint. So someone's actually even said this in the chat, that idea of connection. So Dan Siegel calls it connect before redirect. Rapport before reason is another way it's been described by someone in Australia called Riley. And it's this idea of laying that foundation. And if we're trying to use logic and reasoning too much too soon, when a child is in a distressed state, which might be manifesting with what we think is bad behavior, then we're kind of trying to build a house before we have that foundation. And what this relational approach builds a connection, a sense of trust, respect, acceptance. So that child in turn is much more likely to listen to you, to do what you ask, and to respond to you. And there's been a little bit of chat about what's known as attention-seeking behavior. What we prefer to call it is attention-needing behavior, or what's also known as attachment-seeking behavior. There is a need there, and it could just simply be boredom, which is, and someone said in the chat, that's hard to accept when you're a teacher. But, you know, who knows what else might actually be going on? And it just might be manifesting in this mucking around, what seems to be mucking around behavior. But if you start to empathize, saying, look, I'm getting that you know, perhaps this isn't great, and you're not enjoying this at the moment, let's talk about this later. Or, you know, depending on the age of the child and the context of the situation, you're still trying to make a connection with them, because you're showing them you understand. You know what that feeling is that they're feeling, and that maybe we can work on it. And maybe you can have a minute after lesson to say, look, I noticed you were a bit bored in that lesson. Do you want to talk about what a bit about it is that you were bored about, you know, and so on. So at least they're showing that you're connecting with them. So I hope that kind of answers that. And there's this lovely quote here from a fantastic chap. He's actually written a lot of stuff on trauma. I'm sure you've heard of them. You will seem a really knowledgeable audience, which is fantastic. Called Van der Kolk. He's written, it's become a new bestseller actually during COVID, called The Body Keeps the Score. But he's talking here about what the research is saying and how important those first couple of steps are, especially because they're mostly missed out. And it sometimes just can only be a sentence or two. You won't necessarily always use every single step all at the same time. With older children, you might be coming back and revisiting it. One secondary school, they would try and do the emotion coaching in the moment, the first couple of steps. And sometimes the behavior was such that they had a consequence. But instead of having detention, what they did is that they had a consequence for the child if their behavior was particularly difficult. They tried to empathize in the moment, but they said that, you know, this is not okay. So there's going to be a consequence. But instead of making them sit in silence, which is what they used to do, they had a restorative conversation. They did the problem solving. They went over the limit setting them. They reflected back on what had happened. Now, again, that's something you would do with older children. If you're in the nursery, you're going to be much more in the moment with them. And what they most need is that putting the lid back on, especially the calming and the soothing. And then you can, in an age-appropriate way, say, next time we go to our calming corner. And maybe you sit with them in the calming corner to help them practice putting the lid back on. The more practice they get putting the lid back on, the more able they're going to be able to do it themselves, and so on. So that's kind of sums up what we're trying to do. But of course, don't forget, and again, this is something that has already come up this morning from you and from Elena. You can't self-regulate if you, you can't co-regulate if you can't self-regulate. And there's some fabulous data from our research projects, just to finish off, that shows that doing emotion coaching helps to bring down the teacher stress. Not just because there are less incidences that go on, less time wasted on children who have really challenging behavior, for example, and so on, but also it helps them feel calmer. And there's a great quote from one practitioner who said, I feel more in control, but less controlling. And that was a great way, I think, to describe it. It's not about power assertion, which is often what happens in behavior. What emotion coaching does mostly is to help de-escalate. And that's what the research overwhelmingly shows, even with children with additional needs. So that's a summary. You're telling them this. I understand. You're not alone. This is what might be happening. This is what you might be feeling, but we can't always get what we want. And you know what? We can try and find a way forward. There's free webinars if you want to find out more. There's even a book. I don't get any money for this book. I get 10p a copy, I think. So I'm not going to go off to the Bahamas off the back of your hard-earned cash. There's a discount going on at the moment. They actually have already sold out, but they're reprinting them. It tells you everything you need to know. It's easy bedtime reading, and it's got loads and loads of examples, including examples with children with additional needs. So there you go, folks. And you'll see there are other slides with lots of data showing the impact, including data from the University of Oxford that you can read about that shows how emotion coaching can be used even with vulnerable children and so on. And look at that long list of references. There you go. That's it from me. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Janet. That was really, really great. Thank you. I'm sure people loved the different clips and the different explanations. So we do have some questions. Actually, Alex had just asked for some recommendation reading. So I guess that slide will cover it. But if you could recommend just one thing, like what would be the starting point for them if they want to get into it?
I would just go to the website, which I've put the link on. All you have to do now is Google Emotion Coaching UK. That clip someone asked is on that website under resources for professionals. There's even resources there for you to teach pupils about this stuff. We've got, you can do peer mentor training. There's where the pupils are supporting each other. And Elena talked nicely about that as well. So yeah. And of the book that I just mentioned as well.
Great. And then there was a question by Nico, and I think it relates to your last slide about putting your mask on before helping the child.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's more about how can the school help the teachers. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as you can imagine, we've done this work all over England and the UK, and also abroad in other countries. As well, and in Australia, for example, in South Korea, and in Europe, in Turkey, etc. So the best thing to do is to have whole school training in this, of course. And again, go to the website. You can find out more information. It's a not-for-profit organization, by the way. Because like Eleanor, we just want to get the word out there. We just want to help and support where we can and so on. And this idea of staff, and by the way, some people have started small and then they cascade the training. So just a small group of teachers or TAs do the training and then they cascade it out. That's another way to sort of do it in a kind of gradual way. Understand your own emotions. Very good, important question. And that slide I just showed you about you can't co-regulate if you can't self-regulate. So lots of emotion coaching is actually about regulating your own emotions. Because I can remember a boy in my classroom that I had when I first started teaching in inner city London. This was a looked after child, and I like to think that I was compassionate, but this child got up to everything. He used to urinate in the paint pots in my classroom. I don't know if anyone's had that one. This was clearly a distressed, traumatized child. And I wish I could have had emotion coaching because I feel I would have helped him so much better. But all I had back then was rewards and sanctions. And it only helped him so much. It only went so far. He needed much more than that. And I felt every emotion. I felt fear. I felt anger. I felt disgust. I felt sadness. I felt all those feelings. So yes, you need to regulate yourself. And emotion coaching, you can emotion coach yourself. I'm feeling really frustrated now, but I've got to put my lid back on so that I can now co-regulate someone else. And yes, we do try and put it into teacher training. I've taught many teacher training courses, and yeah, absolutely. And we train teachers all and early years practitioners all over and other professionals, by the way. Police, health professionals, inclusion workers, all over the country.
Amazing, that's great. And I like to think that we're helping a little bit by having you here on our conference as well.
Thank you.
Great. So there's one more question here, which I'm guessing that's not her real name or his real name, but it's YouTube name. But it's about teenagers. Yeah.
Yeah, good question. So I'm sure you now know that there's lots more research about the teenage brain. And what the research suggests with emotion coaching, this has been used with young people. I worked, for example, in one youth center where the police were being called all the time to this youth center. So we started training the young people as peer mentors, and they started using it with each other. And the police stopped coming because they were starting to regulate their own feelings. What we found most with young people is they know the rules. They also they don't want to be told what to do or how to do it either. But what they most want is empathy and validation of how they're feeling. And it can be very tricky because with younger people it can sound quite patronizing. But there are ways that you can do that. There was one 14-year-old girl who used to just run out the class. She'd storm off, she'd flip, and off she'd go. So they started using emotion coaching and trying to tune in to how she was feeling. So look, and they tried to tune in when she was showing the low levels of disruption, when she was starting to show a bit irritation, and she started to feel connected with. They weren't saying to her, right, don't forget the rules and what can you do about it. They were just doing steps 1 and 2, but doing it in a look. You're not feeling okay. I think today. What do you want to talk about it? She go, oh yeah, my mum was whatever. She was actually in a foster home. And this was about her actual mother. And my mother was trying to, call me, and I couldn't talk to her, and it was those sorts of things. So they just had a chat about that, and just that was sort of setting a little scene for the actual lesson for her to feel connected with, so that she was less likely in that lesson to just sit with this irritation and distress. Feelings she probably didn't even understand or know. And of course, you will find with emotion coaching, as you might say, I think you're feeling angry, and they'll say, I'm not angry. So you say, okay, I got that wrong, but something doesn't seem okay. So you're not always specifically labeling a feeling, and you're not trying to impose a feeling on a child, but you're just trying to some way communicate that you're trying to connect with them. You're trying to help and support them. And by tuning into how they might be feeling is a very powerful way to help that person feel connected with. So I hope that's okay.
Yeah, fantastic. So here we have one more question about a different group of students.
Yeah, good. A good point, and something I briefly touched on. So this has been used with children children who have selective mutes, for example. Children have English, for example, as additional language. And so on. So again, you would be looking to all the aids that you would normally use to support children in these situations, more visual aids, and using, just don't underestimate the power of your own role modeling, of your own facial expression, showing concern, trying to sort of communicate, maybe you feel sad, that sort of thing. And like with social stories, you say, you would be trying to sort of illustrate, this is what we must do. You would be role modeling it, demonstrating, when I feel angry, I go here, this sort of thing. So it has been used with children with additional needs, also visually impaired and hearing impaired. So we've got emotion coaches around who work with children with all sorts of additional needs in that way. So it is more tricky. I agree, it is more challenging, but we find other ways in, like we did with the boy we couldn't just say you are feeling angry. We had to say you are seeing red, and that was the way in for him.
Super, fantastic. So I think we have time for one final question, and then everybody don't go away, because I'm gonna play a recorded session from Paul. So Paul Hume, who was supposed to give a live session, but he had a family emergency, unfortunately, but he recorded his session. So I'm going to play for you. It's a 10-minute presentation, so please stay for you to see. It's a little treat for you before we go away for the weekend. So final question for you, Dr. Janet, is... the last word was support them.
Yeah, good. I saw this point, and yeah, it is very hard. And I think I tried to address it a little bit, but the point there, Rhiannon, is that it is hard. And that's why I mentioned that story about my own teaching, where I felt every feeling with the child. It's very hard not to personalize children's behavior. And that's why it's so important to not to depersonalize it. What is great about emotion coaching is that in teaching them about things like, you know, our brains are flipping, but we can help put the lid back on, is that you stop it being about you are a naughty child or you are a bad teacher. It becomes about something's not balanced here, something's not in sync, something's not feeling okay, but I can try and do something about it. So it is hard to not take things personally, but it's about working with the children, thinking, hey, what can we do? What would make this better for you or more interesting for you? I've got to teach it. This is the syllabus. I'm thinking I could try it this way. Do you have any ideas? So maybe it's working with them a little bit. Okay.
Amazing. All right. So
thank you, everybody. It's been great spending time with you. And I can see there's been some amazing comments as well. So thank you very much for your interest.
no, thank you so much for being here. I'm sure everybody loved it. I thought it was very interesting. And please feel free to connect with Janet on Twitter as well, on her website for more information.
Good morning, everyone. I want to start by thanking Dr. Bellum and the team at Seneca for giving me the opportunity to talk today. My name is Paul Hume, and I'm a deputy head teacher at a bilingual school in West London. I've been teaching for 14 years, and I've been privileged to work with a great diversity of schools across London. In that time, I've developed different approaches to behaviour, and today I will be talking to you about one of those, restorative justice, and how it works. So what is restorative justice? Well, according to John Braithwaite, it's a process where all stakeholders affected by an injustice have an opportunity to discuss how they have been affected by the injustice and to decide what should be done to repair the harm. With crime, for instance, restorative justice is about the idea that because crime hurts, justice should heal. It follows that conversations with those who have been hurt and with those who have inflicted the harm must be central to the process. In his book, Crime, Shame and Reintegration in 1989, Braithwaite argues that restorative justice enables both offenders and citizens, by way of mediation, to repair the harm caused by crime. And he's also facilitated restorative justice to many areas of business, regulation, healthcare, and aged care. My first encounter with restorative justice was at an inset meeting a few years ago. Jane Roller from our local education psychology consultation service had developed a guide for using restorative justice in our schools. Our head teacher introduced this to us as a way for us to adapt and improve our response to behaviour in school. We'd recently reviewed our behaviour and anti-bullying policies, and this was something she was keen to implement. As with a lot of new changes, though, it was met with a degree of scepticism, myself included, and a great many questions. What was wrong with the way we were doing things? Why this new strategy? Nevertheless, the head teacher had us role-play a few scenarios, and after time, we embraced it and saw the benefits of it. I now stand by this way of dealing with behaviour and have brought it with me to the schools I've worked in, helping them to see its benefits. In my capacity as deputy head teacher, I've also used it successfully to deal with conflict resolution between adults as well. For me, restorative justice brings peace. I enjoy it. I know it sounds strange considering, but when you see it in action, when you allow children to go deeper and deal with the issues themselves and face-to-face, you see them go on to talk more with each other. You see them turn first to discussion rather than hurt. It makes it all worthwhile. Of course, it doesn't prevent the odd flare-up here and there. We're humans at the end of the day. But it does bring more peace, more love, more happiness within. We need to be clear on a few matters first, though. Well, to begin with, what do we mean by behaviour? We say that it's here to deal with behaviour. Well, behaviour is our actions, words, and manner. It's us. When we say that restorative justice is dealing with behaviour, it's not dealing with all behaviour, is it? It's restoring, repairing the broken relationships caused by negative behaviour, whether that be within ourselves or with others. Next, it's a systematic approach. There are steps involved, and all the steps need to be followed in order for it to be successful and, more importantly, equitable and fair for all. Most importantly, it requires love. And when I say love, I mean understanding. It needs empathy, it needs compassion, a desire to put right, a love for human relationships. This is crucial. Once those matters are dealt with, then, it's fairly straightforward. When I first began using it, I felt that it was quite methodical, left me cold almost to begin with. I felt that I was simply following the steps but not really being emotionally involved. And while that might be the case to begin with, it does evolve. It has to. As you become accustomed to the process, the steps become second nature, allowing you to focus more on the individuals, their relationships. It becomes a much more organic experience as you grow. Going forward from there, children should then be taught the process so that they themselves, perhaps as peer mediators, can take action to resolve conflict themselves, although some situations must still be brought to an adult's attention to deal with. How do I know it's been a success? Well, it can be seen firsthand as their relationships improve. Also, I've had teachers, senior managers, parents comment on the improvements they've seen. And this is how I roll it out, demonstrating. And the positive effects are noticed. Others become interested, and then it becomes a whole school focus. So rather than going into the school and demanding that this is how it should be and putting everyone's backs up, instantly breaking relationships with everyone so that, ironically, I need restorative justice to put things right. Well, what is it then? Where do we start? Well, when there is a conflict, the process is as follows. Decide whether it can be resolved with peer mediators, the children themselves, or should be resolved by an adult. And if there's no peer mediators yet, then obviously with an adult. The aim then is to get both stories told and relationships repaired. And the skills that people need as they're dealing with this is to learn the interview by heart, to remember what's said and to know when to refer further. And level 1 is where we start. So both together. You outline what will happen. We're here to help. We're not going to take sides. We're not going to interrupt. We'll ask you both the same questions. And then you ask the first person the questions. What happened? How are you feeling? How were you feeling then? How are you feeling now? What were you thinking then? And what are you thinking now? And then the mediator, the adult, reflects back the answers that the person has given, and then asks the same questions to the next person. And then once both have been asked those questions, then both are asked, well, how do you think we can put this right and make this better? So they both give their response to that. Then it goes to level 2. That's a joint meeting, and this only happens if the wrongdoer, if that's what you want to call it, acknowledges what they've done, and you're clear about what happened. And the parties have had the time to reflect and are willing to meet together. So you thank everyone for making the effort to meet. Explain that this person, the wrongdoer, if you like, has admitted their part, and explain that we'll look at what happened and how the other person was affected. So no sides will be taken, no judgments are being made. We'll look at how the harm can be repaired, and we'll all have the opportunity to speak and be listened to. So then you ask the first person. So it's similar to the level 1 meeting again. So you re-establish, like, what happened? What were you thinking? How did you feel? What have you thought since? What has been the hardest thing for you? And who has been affected by what happened? And then you ask those questions to the other person as well. Then you ask each person in turn, what needs to be done or said to make things better here? And then, is there anything else that you'd like to see happen? So both get a chance to speak to that and respond. And then to everyone, then you say, is this the end of the matter? And then you run through and you summarise the agreements that everyone's agreed on. So all the points that they've made about what they'd like to see happen. Now, it does seem formulaic and a bit cold at first, but as you learn the process, you'll find that you'll naturally adapt it. It'll become a much more organic experience. But remember that all it takes is love, understanding, empathy, compassion, a desire to put right, a love for human relationships. Love. Thank you for your time. I know it was quite a quick summary, but I am going to publish this as an article, so look out for that. And then, but feel free to DM me with any questions you have, or for the slides if you like. And you can reach me at teacherpaul1978. So thank you again, and have a lovely day.
Great. So thank you so much, everybody who joined. That was Paul. Like I said, he had a family emergency, but he was very kind to record that presentation. Please get in touch with him on Twitter. He would love to hear from you. But I think that is all for our conference. So thank you so much for joining. Thank you to Elena and Janet who were here and presented live to you. I hope that you all enjoyed. There were so many comments and questions and interactions in the chat. That was brilliant. I really liked that. We will be sharing the presentations and slides and etc. next week. So feel free to share. Make sure you give it a like to this video so that you have it saved on your own YouTube, and then you can find it anytime. You can share it with your colleagues who couldn't be here today. And that's it. Make sure you check out senecalearning.com because we have even more free CPD available. We have at least 20 different free CPD courses that you can take, all free, all online. We have another conference coming up at the end of October about curriculum. So that'll be a good one as well. I'm going to share those links on the email with you together with the presentations. So thank you so much. Nice to meeting you virtually, all of you. And I hope to see you again at the end of October in the next conference and anywhere on the Seneca Learning website as well. Have a great day. Bye-bye.